Ooh, that looks tasty. Welcome folks, today the Hungry Gamer is back with another mini review, and today we're talking about Monster Hunter World from Steam Forged Games. And the particular set that I have, thank you to Steam Forged Games for sending it to me, is the Ancient Forest. And there are a couple of core sets, but they all play mostly the same. It's just what type of hunters and what type of monsters you can actually hunt is in the box. Now, what this game is this is a boss battler game. And it's going to be broken down into two phases. You'll have the gathering phase, which is a little bit of narrative story as you're kind of making your way to find the big monster. And at its core, you'll get a little bit of narrative, and you're going to wind up with a little more time, a little less time to beat the monster, and you'll finish a successful hunt with a little more or a little less resources. Is basically how it's going to work. But most of the game is going to take place during the monster hunt phase, or the monster fight phase, where it's simply a boss battle between you and this big monster. And what's going to happen is the monster AI will tell you how many different activations you're going to get before the monster is going to do its attack. And there's some positioning that you can do but it's a little more of an abstract style positioning that you're doing, kind of close far, rather than what you might think of in a game like Adventure Tactics, where you have kind of hexes, where you have squares, or you're kind of moving around kind of wherever you want. It's a little more abstract. But at its core, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be playing cards onto your own little cooldown board, for want of a better way to put it, and doing different things. And like in the video game, you're going to get to take actions based off of your weapon set. If you have a sword and shield, you're going to have to get in a little bit closer, but you have a little more defense, versus if you have kind of a huge double-handed sword, which will do more damage, but it's going to be slower. And each weapon set has different cards that you'll get that you'll be able to use. And along with that, you'll be able to do crafting. You beat a monster, you get resources. You can use those resources to make armor and make new weapons, which, as you guessed, new weapons will let you do more damage and will give you more ability, and will change up kind of the cards that you have. While new armor doesn't do as much, but again will improve as you go. And as you do that, you'll also be able to face off against harder and harder level monsters, which will be mostly the same, but will, as you can imagine, have more health and get a little stronger as you go through each different level of monster. And then the last thing is you'll have a choice. You can either play in campaign mode, which means you're going to go through, I believe it's like 60 days, which is 60 different hunts, but with each hunt you're getting more and more stuff, and you're kind of powering up, and you're mostly trying to beat the most powerful monsters that you can. Or you can just do simple one-offs, and the rules tell you exactly what you need to do to just do a one-off against the various different monsters. And that's a broad overview of how this game works. So what do I like about this game? The first thing, I have to say, as with many other Steam Forged games, the minis are fantastic. Here we have the Rathalos, and just look at the size of this thing compared to my face. Right? I mean, this thing is huge. And now this is the biggest one. It has the wings that you can take the wings off, so you can store it a little easier. But it's huge, and the table presence is awesome. Awesome. So we have to start there. The next thing I'll say is I do really appreciate that this game you can just drop in, do a fight, and be done. Now, I love campaigns, and I also appreciate that this campaign, it's not so much of a campaign really as a keep powering yourself up and doing stronger and stronger things, but I like those two options, and I really like that either option is simple. It's just not hard to do. Next thing I'll say is, like or dislike the gathering phase. It's quick and it's simple. You jump in, you do your thing, you get your bonus or your penalty or whatever, and you move on. And I appreciate that it adds a little bit of variety to how you're starting out, but it's relatively simple. Next thing I'm going to say is, I like that the crafting system in itself is pretty easy to grok. It's not hard to understand what you're going to do, and at the same time, it's also really satisfying when you've gone through and you've been trying to get some piece of monster so you can make this one thing, and then finally you have the piece of armor that you've been trying to get, or you've upgraded your weapon to the next level and you're so excited about it. It's really satisfying. The next thing I'll say is the monster AI is pretty darn simple, but it does something that I think is pretty cool. Is every card's going to tell you how many activations you're going to get before it's going to do something again. And I really like the way that works. I also like the reverse side of the card is kind of letting you know somewhat what might be happening. It kind of telegraphs it just a little bit. Next thing I'll say is I like that the hunters and the monsters are very different. Now, that said, the hunters are more based around what weapon sets you're using, but still, they're very, very different when you play. It can lead to a very different experience if you're playing with sword and shield versus you're playing with that giant hammer that I mentioned earlier. But what I think I like the most about the game is just the kind of the core card play when you are fighting. I really like the way that it works. I like the way that I like how it feels like you have a little bit of a timing aspect as you're doing each of your different abilities and you're playing them out there. I like the way that works. I even like the way that when you run out of damage cards, you have to take a dead turn to resharpen your weapon. Which brings me to the last thing that I want to say here is that as someone that played the video game, now, it's been a while since I played the video game, but a lot of the things in this game really strike me as thematic. The sharpening of your weapon is so unbelievably thematic. I cannot tell you the amount of times that I would find myself kind of rolling way far away to try to sharpen my sword before the monster charged at me. It just is really thematic as far as that goes. Same thing with the crafting. I think that is really, really thematic the way that works. I like the way how the monsters, they have different directions that they're facing. Depending on where you're hitting them, you're going to do different damage to them. They have weak spots. All of that is very, very true to the video game, and I really, really like that. So what are my quibbles with the game? Well, I'll start with the gathering phase that I mentioned. It's a little repetitive. And as you go back and kind of do these monsters over and over again, you're going to find yourself just kind of skipping the fluff text and moving to, okay, what exactly is going to happen, make my choice and move on. Next thing I'm going to say is, while the crafting is very satisfying when you succeed, sometimes it just feels like a grind. You're trying to get a piece that you need and you can't get it, which on the other hand is very true to the video game also. I can't tell you how many times when I was playing I would go fight a Rathalos over and over and over again trying to get one specific piece that I just couldn't get. And the same thing with my next quibble is kind of the time factor. You have the set of cards, and when that set of cards runs out, that's it. You've lost if you haven't won already. There's other ways to lose too, but that kind of happens. And it's really unsatisfying when you run out of cards and suddenly it's done. And that said, it's also very true to the video game, because in the video game you have a timer and you can just run out of time, and I can't tell you how many times I was like, I almost have it dead. Time. And so that is very frustrating in the video game. It's also frustrating in the board game, because it just feels like it's a arbitrary time still in the game, and if you flip over some cards, it's like, oh, lose 4 more cards. And that just is a real bummer, because unlike the video game, you're spending way more effort to play this than you do in the video game, and so it's bad enough when you run out of time on the clock in the video game. It's worse when it happens here. The next thing that I'll say is, to me, if you're playing this at max player count, it feels like you have a bit of downtime going on. It's not as satisfying as when you're playing at 2 players, or even better, 2 players playing 2 hunters. Then it feels really, really good. But the game plays a lot more than 2 players, and it just seems like when you're playing at the higher player counts, you wind up with a little more downtime than I would like in this type of game. Last thing I'll say is, as cool as the minis are, they're huge, and there is a lot of box that's just kind of filled with space, and it's going to take up a lot of space on your shelf, especially if you really get into it and you're like, okay, I'm going to buy the other core sets for all the other monsters, and you can mix and match, and the mixing and matching is awesome, but also is going to take up a lot of space. But there you have it, folks. That is Monster Hunter Ancient Forest. I think this is a good boss battle, especially if you're looking for one that's easy to do one-offs. I think it's great for one-offs. Really, really great for one-offs. And also, I have to say that if you are a painter, the painting that you can do on this is just shockingly good. I cannot tell you. It's hard to see with what I showed you, but these minis are really, really good, and they're going to look really good if you take the time to paint them up. But as I said, I think if you're looking for a lighter, faster, and in some ways cheaper boss battler, because there's a lot of gameplay in just one box, and it does play very quickly, then this might be a good option for you. I think if you're looking for something that really feels like the video game, it does a pretty darn good job of doing that. And so if that's appealing to you, if you're not looking for the long campaign, if you're not looking for the Oathsworn boss battle, but you're doing 22 different missions and you have 22 long stories in between, then this might be one that is worth checking out for you. But there you have it, folks. As always, if you found this video useful, please like, subscribe, share, maybe become a channel member. As always, thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.